Since Astro first came upon the scene, it's captured the hearts and minds of a lot of developers for good reason. It captured mine too. I've been building with it since the early betas. What I really like is it starts very simple. If you just need HTML with a few variables sprinkled in so that you can template out HTML as you need, Astro is perfect for you. However, if you have more complex needs, like using a full front-end UI framework like React embedded inside of your Astro site, you can do that. Now, there's way more beyond that. You can use SSR or middleware, Astro Islands. There's so much you can do, and we haven't even touched content collections, my favorite feature. This video is my attempt to get you started with everything you need to know about Astro. We'll look at page structure and routing, we'll look at style and script tags, and we'll try to go fairly quickly so that you can get a good overview in just a few minutes. Are you ready? Let's jump in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, let's get started straight away with a new Astro project. Now, to get started, you need Node on your machine, which you can check with this Node version flag here. As of the recording of this video, you need 18.17.1 or higher, or 20.3 or higher, but just go ahead and check the Astro docs that I'll link below. If you don't have it, you can go to nodejs.org and download the latest LTS version. Now, with that prerequisite, let's go ahead and create a new Astro project with the Astro CLI, and I'll just name it Astro Sample. And to get started with, let's go ahead and create an empty project. We'll write in TypeScript, we'll set it as strict, and install the dependencies with a new Git repository. This Astro CLI is one of the things I like the best about it because it's just really easy and nice to get started with. It's also great for adding integrations, which we'll see a little bit later. All right, and just like that, we're set up and ready to go. Let me open up VS Code and Chrome. All right, I've got both of these open. Let's go ahead and start the project though with npm run dev. Now you can use pnpm or yarn as well with Astro, but I'm just choosing to use npm right now. Now this will launch at localhost 4321, and you can see we've got our basic Astro project up. And next I want to talk about the structure of an Astro project. You can see over here I've got an src directory, and I've also got a public directory among other things. Let's talk about these two in that order. In the src directory, you do need a pages directory. This is the only required directory to start with, and you need an index.astro page, which is your home route. You can see here if I change this to something like Astro's, you'll see it says Astro's right here. Astro's routing is file-based. So here you can see I have an index.astro, which shows up on my index route. However, if I were to copy this, and let's change this to something like about.astro, and down here, just so we can see the difference, I'll say about. And if I come over here and I just change this to /about, you'll see that now it says about. So everything inside of here is page route by default. Now, it doesn't have to be an Astro file. It can also be an HTML file. And obviously, we'll need to get rid of this front matter, which we'll talk about in a second. And now it should work just the same, right? So it's just a file right here. Now, this can also simply be a markdown file. So if I come over here and change this to a markdown file, it would also work as well. In fact, let's go ahead and make this an H1 as well. And that way it looks the exact same. So .astro files, HTML files, and markdown files all work the same way. Now, if you don't have an HTML structure, it will actually wrap your entire file in an HTML structure and simply output your content. Now, just one quick note, and that is if you ever don't want a page to be bundled by Astro, you can just prefix it with this underscore and it will not build that page. So that's a nice, quick, and easy way with either directories or with pages to basically tell Astro, ignore this section. All right, so that's a bit about the pages directory and the src directory. Let's now think about this public directory. Now, if Astro touches files in the src directory, the opposite is true here. It will not touch anything over here. In fact, I can just come to my favicon.svg, and if I were to change this so you can actually see the color, so let's change it to something like this. Now you'll see it shows up right over here, right? So it's at the root of my directory. So any files you do not want Astro to touch, you can put right here. Now this is getting a little ahead of ourselves, but if I were to come over here and do npm run build, which is the build script, it will check everything and build it to a dist folder right here. And you'll notice that the favicon.svg is at the root of my site because that's exactly what it does. Anything in the public directory, it doesn't touch, it just throws in the root of your build. Now you can adjust some of those settings and do some more configuration in the astro.config.mjs file, which we'll look at here in a little bit, but this is essentially where you define certain things about your project. All right, next I want to talk a little bit about the structure of an actual Astro file. So let's come back over here to this index page, and you'll notice something immediately. You've got these weird little ticks at the top. This is called the front matter, and everything down here is what's output on the page. So let's come back over here to my home route. You'll notice that's exactly what we've got. Let's actually get this up and running again with npm run dev, and that way you can actually see what we're doing. Now, importantly, everything in this front matter section is run on build or server side. That means you can do full JavaScript inside of here, and then everything down here is what's actually output. Now you'll notice I've got this section here in curly brackets, and that's a hint for us that everything down this way, you can actually take stuff from the top and put it down here, or use any JavaScript expressions as long as you surround them with these curly brackets. So as an example, let's come up here and we'll say something like my num, and we'll set this to 1. Now I can simply come down here and just say my num, and you'll see it shows up just like that, Astro 1. Now you may have noticed that I got some nice IntelliSense there, and that's because I'm using the Astro extension, which is really required if you're going to be working with Astro. It gives you really nice IntelliSense, language support, auto-completion, a bunch of other stuff. So make sure that you install that. Now, you're obviously not limited just to like referencing values up here. You can actually come in here and do math on this as well. So I could say my num plus 2. And notice Astro realizes that this is a type of number. It's actually inferred that from up here, and that means it knows that I can add to it right here. Now, because it also knows this type, I can also do other cool stuff. So notice I've got all the methods attached automatically because of that Astro extension. So let's go ahead and switch this up. Obviously, we can do other things like strings and booleans, but let's add something else. We're going to call this my object. And notice I've got two properties, name and age, and these are strings and numbers. Well, what I can do is just come over here and let's reference my object dot, and notice it gives me all the different properties available. So I could say age right here, or name, and then down here I could say age. And again, it knows that this is a string, so I've got all the string methods right here, and it knows that this is a number, so I've got all the number methods there as well. So anytime you want to output something from up top here, you can do it in these curly brackets. Now, of course, you don't just have to use stuff from the top front matter. You can come in here and just say something like new date, and then I could say like to locale string, and just do a JavaScript expression directly inside of here. Now, again, you can just do expressions. You cannot do full statements, so I can't do like an if statement or anything like that. If you're used to working with something like React, it's very similar to that. This is like JSX, except without some of the annoying things, which we'll look at here in a second. Now, sometimes you'll have things you want to actually loop over. So let's come up here. We're going to change this to my array. And here I just have two strings in the array. Well, what I can do is grab my array and just map over those items. So I'll just call it like a name. And we're going to output here a paragraph tag that just has name inside of it. Now there's a couple things I did there. Notice that I gave this a name. So for each iteration, I'm calling this name, and this is also a name. And then I'm just adding it right here. But notice I have to put it inside of curly brackets as well. I'm actually implicitly returning from this map. You can see that right here. However, sometimes you might have multiple things you want to return. In that case, you need to remember this. If you're not used to working with JSX, you cannot do this because that doesn't return unless you type return, right? So if you want to return something, you have to actually just do it in parentheses like this, and then you can return it. And notice that the Astro extension gets rid of that because it realizes that I don't need it. But if I had another paragraph down here that said like hi, I'd be returning 2 items. Now here, you'll notice something. If you're used to working with JSX, I don't have to have a single parent like in React. I can have multiple siblings and it's totally fine. I also do not need a key because again, this isn't live data. It's just going to statically build this using whatever content I put in here. And then when it builds, it'll just statically build this HTML so that it will look just like this. Now, so far, we've just been working with the local data right here, but we can actually import data from elsewhere in our project. So let's go ahead and get rid of this right here. And I'm going to come up here and we're going to import something, but first of all, I have to add it. So I'm going to come over here and remember that everything Astro touches needs to be inside of this src directory. That's where it can do its magic. So I'm going to come over here. We're just going to create a new folder. We'll call this data. You could call it whatever you want. And then inside here, we'll have something like sample.json. And notice here, I have 2 different people in an array. Let's close this down, and I'm just simply going to import this. We can call it whatever we want. I'll just call it like people, and then I'll say from, and I'm just going to go up to my data folder and then sample.json. Now here's the really cool thing. Astro uses V behind the hood, and V can interpret all that data and tell us what type it is. So I can come over here and take my people.map, and I'll map over each person, which I'll just call P. We're going to output multiple things, so I'll wrap it in parentheses here. And then let's just say paragraph here, and this will be, again, in curly brackets, P dot, and notice I've got all these items, P dot name, P dot age, P dot email, and all these things will now show this way. Now, if you're not familiar with this in VS Code, if you hit Control and Spacebar, that's what gives you that dropdown. If it doesn't show automatically for you, that will help you out, whether you're in Astro or using something else. So we've looked at local data. We've looked at data that we've imported from elsewhere in our project. You can also just simply grab data from anywhere on the internet. So let me go ahead and open up JSON placeholder. This is just a nice little REST API that kind of gives you sample data here. What we're going to do is just grab this first to do, and we're going to import it into our project. All this right here, this front matter is run on build or server side. It's actually wrapped in an async function. That means I can come over here and just do something like request equals await because I have top level await. And here I'll just request that right there, and we'll go ahead and get the data. We'll just call it data, and this will be from await request.json. Now, without belaboring the point, let's just go ahead and console log this and think through this here quickly. I do have this showing me in Console Ninja, but is this going to log on the server or is it going to log on the client? Well, everything up here again is server-side run, which means if I want to see this log, I've got to come over here to the server, and notice I've got all these items being pulled in. Now, importantly, by default, Astro builds statically, which means this data will be fetched on build and then not again. So it's not like it's getting fetched every time somebody comes to your site. You can add what's called an SSR adapter to add that functionality to your site. And a lot of my sites, that's kind of the default for me. I will have static built sections and then SSR pages where I need them. Okay, let's get rid of all that. I'm going to come back over here and just to label this, let's call this like home route, just so we know what it is. And then let's open up the sidebar, and I'm going to just get rid of this about one, and we're going to remake it here. So I'll just copy this over. We'll call this about once again, and then I'll change this to about because I want to talk about another feature of Astro, and that is layouts. Now, I've had to redo a lot of boilerplate here, but wouldn't it be nice if I could have a component that held all of that and I simply just slotted in the content that was different? Well, that's where layouts come in. What I'm going to do is come over to my SRC directory, again, because that's what Astro can touch, and I'll add a layouts directory. Not required to name it that way, but that's convention, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll call this base layout.astro, and I'm just going to copy all the boilerplate right here, and I'll just copy and paste it over this way. Now you can use what's called slots inside of any Astro file. By default, you can just do it like this, and this will be the default slot. Now, what I can do is come over here to both of these pages and import my base layout. Now you import it and use it very much like you would use an HTML tag. So I'll say base layout, just like that. And then I could have a starting and closing one, and anything I put in between here, like home, will simply show in that slot section. So just like that, you could say I've got that. I'll come over here and do the exact same thing. We'll call this about. Because I obviously have not imported it here, I'll do Control and Spacebar and pull that in with the Astro extension. Now notice if I go to home, it shows home. If I go to about, it shows about. Anything else I put inside of this base layout could show in both of them. So for instance, I would probably wrap this thing in a main tag, and then maybe I say something like, I don't know, paragraph with hi. Now notice that will show up on the about page, and it will also show up on the home page once I refresh. So both of these things are showing here for me now because it's part of the base layout. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want hi, you'd probably want something like a nav. So let's come up top here. We'll have a little nav component where I'll have a link, and this will point to home, and I'll come down here, and this will point to about, like that. Now notice both of these now have this, so I can go to home, and then I can go to about, and they both contain the same component. So we've looked at the structure of an Astro project, the actual structure of an Astro file, we've used layouts and slots. Now I want to talk about passing props, because you'll notice that both of these pages simply say Astro. Here it says Astro, and here it says Astro. But wouldn't it be nice if we could name this? Well, you can with something called props. So what I'm going to do is actually pass a prop in here, which we'll pass in as our Astro title right here. So what I can do is come in here and say Astro dot, just like we've got dot generator. Here I can say dot props dot whatever the thing happens to be. So we're going to call this title. Right now it doesn't exist. So notice it doesn't know what to do with that. And once again, notice how this has to be in curly brackets because we're doing some kind of expression down this way. Here we're pulling in some data that we're passing to this. Now what I can do is come over here, and in the front tag here for my base layout, I can provide a title like home. Let's do the same thing for about, just over here. And now notice this one says home, and this one should say about, right like that. And this one says about, this one says home. So I'm actually able to pass in content from one component to another, or in this case, from one page to its wrapper parent. It's one Astro file to another, and this just worked between Astro files. Now you'll notice over here, we just did astro.props.title, but typically what you'll do is extract this out. So what I'm going to do is come up here, we'll say const title equals astro.props. So I'm just destructuring it from the object that I get from Astro. Now you can actually provide a default here as well. So I could say something like, let's just call it default. And then if I don't pass that in, so if I come back over here, we get rid of this right here, you'll notice that in the Astro route, it simply says default. So you can pass that in as a default. Now this becomes really powerful when you start to build components. So maybe that's what we should do next. Let's come over here. And right now we're just using the link tag, but it's really helpful when you have a component that kind of holds all your logic and all your styles together. So I'm going to come over here. We're going to create a new folder. We'll call this components. And inside here, I'm going to simply create one called link.astro. Now what we want to do is create a component that has a slot for the content of the link. So let's come over here, and I'm just going to have a simple anchor tag, and inside here we'll have our slot. So anything we pass in will be put right here. Now, I do want an href that's required. So I'm going to have this be called href and create a little front matter section up here where we will take that href in. So let's destructure that here. So let's say const href equals astro.props. And now I should be able to use this wherever I want. Now, obviously, in this case, I haven't done a whole lot of useful things here, but you can see how you might add a lot to this component and get a lot of benefit out of it. So let's swap this out for my link, and the Astro extension pulls that in right up here, and I can do the same thing here. Now, these components in the Astro file can not only hold this front matter here, where you can do expressions, you can do full statements in JavaScript, you can import, then it also has the exported HTML down this way, which is just HTML with some superpowers. But in addition to that, it can actually hold its own styling as well. So I could have a style tag in here, and I can just simply grab the anchor link and say that the anchor link should be the color of blue. Now what's cool here is this is actually going to be scoped to this component. So I don't have to give this thing some weird class or name it something. It will automatically be scoped for me. So if I come back over this way and we change this one back just to a normal link, notice that this one is that purple color and only this one has my blue color. I don't know if you can even see that. There you go. All right, hopefully that's more clear. And the reason that's the case is because the link tag is scoping this styling to here. So here you can see how powerful these components can be. You're scoping even the styling to the actual component itself. By default, Astro ships no client-side JavaScript. If you want JavaScript, you can include it in a bunch of different ways, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But for now, just know that you can include a script tag, for instance, or you can use a front-end UI framework like React or Svelte or Vue as well. But here, let's say I say every time I have an anchor link that's clicked, I want to do something. Obviously not something you would do here, but I want you to notice a couple of things. If I come over here and click home, you'll notice it says clicked. Now, what do you think will happen if I click about? Well, if I come over here, you'll notice it says clicked as well. That's an important difference here. Obviously, this is scoped. We've seen that, but these script tags are merely modules. Now, whatever page that they're referenced on, it will pull in all that module, and so it will also reference any other links, in this case, anywhere on your site. Now, we've already talked a little bit about styling, but I want to jump a little bit more into that. Whether you use a style tag right here on a component or on a page, anytime you're using a style tag in Astro down here, it will be scoped to that component or that page. Now, whatever it references must be on that page. So it's not like in the slot any anchor links, it's only anchor links actually referenced in this file. Now, you actually do have some other options here as well. So I could come in here and just declare a style attribute, and then I could put whatever I want here, obviously. So I could do like display none, and obviously none of those links will show, so not very helpful. The other thing I could do though is use more of a JS and CSS style. So I could say display, and then over here none, and that works as well. You can also use CSS modules here if you want to as well. Now, one thing I will mention about the style tag that I haven't yet is that if you want this to not be scoped, you can actually provide a declaration. This is just is:global like this, and this means that this whole tag here will be applied everywhere. And notice as soon as I save it, now they are both blue because this is now a global tag. Now that's not typically how you would do that. And I'll talk about the typical way to have global style sheets in a second. But you do have some other options here as well. So for instance, you can provide a lang attribute and provide some kind of option like Sass. In this case, now it'll actually allow you to use Sass as long as you actually install that. And here you can see I don't have that. All right, let's zoom back in so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to get rid of this lang declaration. Now, lastly here, you can also use CSS frameworks. And here, once again, the Astro CLI is a huge help. So I'm going to come over here and kill all this, and we're just going to use the mpx command, astro add, and then I'm just going to use Tailwind. Now, as soon as I do this, it's going to scaffold out everything for me. It will ask if it can install. I'll say yes. Then it will ask to generate a minimal config file. I'll say yes to that. And then yes, finally here to Tailwind. Let's get this back up and running with npm run dev, and that's all I have to do. So that literally means I can come in here and just provide a class and say like BG blue or something like that, 500 or 400, and you'll notice that that now takes that on. So I don't have to do anything else. And then obviously I have my Tailwind config file as well that I can alter however I want to by extending it, adding plugins, all that kind of stuff. So it's really easy to get started with style tags, whether those are here scoped on the page, whether it's a global declaration with the is::global. It's also easy to use inline styles, whether that's written just normal as a string or with CSS and JS style syntax, or if you want to pass a class with a module here as well and import it up top in this component, that will work as well. Now, I talked a moment ago about how to create global styles, and you can do it here on the style tag, but what's more normal is to actually do it site-wide. So what I'm going to do is just leave this up right here, and I'm going to open up over here, and in the SRC, because again, that's what Astro touches, I'm going to create a styles folder. Again, you don't have to name it that. That's just what I do by convention. We'll have something like global.css. Once again, you don't have to name it that. That's just what I'm doing. So here, let's go ahead and declare a body declaration, and we'll just say background color, and we'll say something like peach buff. Okay, so with this now, I need to get this somehow on my site. Now, what I typically do for my global CSS files is I import them into my base layout. But the important thing is importing a style sheet. As soon as you do that, that component, essentially anything that touches that component will have all those styles associated with it. So if I come over here, we just import here, and I'll do a relative path. So we go up to the styles, and then we go to global CSS. As soon as I save this, the home page over here should have that background color, as well as the about route as well. I'm already on about, so the home and the about, both of them will have that, because this has been declared right here. Now, instead, what I could do is I could come over to my index route, and I could just add the import right here. Now, hopefully, as you might have expected, this will be on the home route only, but it will not be on the about route, because I've only imported it over here. So in a sense, that scopes it, but typically what you do is have a global declaration files, and then you use them in like your base layout. Now, everywhere this base layout is used, so on every route, it will import all of those styles. So that's another way to do it. Of course, you could also have a style tag down here with the is global declaration and kind of keep everything scoped right here. The last thing I want to talk about is client-side JavaScript. Now, by default, Astro ships 0 client-side JavaScript. If you want to opt in, you have to actually declare a script tag. Now, there are other ways to do that as well, like using UI frameworks, which we'll talk about in a second. But I'm just going to come down here, and we'll say script, and then this Astro will take and make a module. Now, the nice thing is you get TypeScript support out of the box. So for instance, if I came in here and said like heading equals document.querySelector, and I selected an H1, let me just add a event listener to that to where every time I click it here, it should now show, let's see, home right here, it should now say heading. And you see Console Ninja is showing this for me here. Now, Astro is smart enough that wherever you have this module, it will actually see where it should bundle it, and then in your final build, will only include it on the pages, the routes, the components where it's needed. And it won't include multiple versions if you happen to have a component that has the same script tag and it's used multiple places on that page. So for instance, let's go ahead and come over here. I'll do npm run build, and we'll just see exactly how it works. So let's come over here, and we should see this dist folder refresh, and there it is. You'll notice I've got my index route right here. And up top here, I've got a link to the style sheet because it's used by the layout. And I've also got a link to this script tag right here. However, if I come over to my about route, you'll see here I've also got a script tag. Now this one says DRQ, and this one over here is BR8. So these are actually separated out as separate modules, and then only the one that's needed is brought in for that particular page. Let's go ahead and close this down, and I'm going to come over here. We'll just create a little folder that we're going to call lib. And then I'm going to have a utils file in here. So we'll do utils.ts. You could use JS as well. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pull this in as console.log, and it'll say like, hi from utils. Now let's go ahead and close down the sidebar. I'm going to come over here and look at the actual index route right here, because instead of just writing it here inline in the script, you can also import it as well. So let's come up to my lib, and we'll use my utils. Now, once this is importing, it will actually load directly on page load. Now that it's importing, it will grab the entire file and read it. And you can see here, it says hi from utils on page load. Now, because it's a module, you can also export from it as well. So let's have a function here. We'll call like console me, and here we'll just say hi from utils. Now, when I refresh, it's still importing, but it's not actually going to call this yet because I haven't called it locally here in the file like this. Next, let's come up here and we will export this function. Now over here, what I can do is instead of importing the entire file, I can simply just grab the thing I need here. And notice it actually gives me this in the IntelliSense. I just need that console me script. So now I can call console me like this, and now it will run on page load because I'm importing it and then running it right here. Now this whole structure is really nice because what it means is you have this front matter that's JavaScript that's run on build or server-side rendered every time somebody accesses your page securely up here. Then you have the actual outputted HTML. Then, if you want, you can have a style tag, and then you can also have script tags as modules loaded for that particular page. I want to mention one other thing about client-side JavaScript before we talk about UI frameworks. If you come in here, you might remember you can say is global, and it makes the style tag global. Well, you also have other declarations you can provide for a script tag. In this case, what I might want to say is I don't want this to be a module. I don't want Astro to do any of its magic. I just want it to be as is written right there. Now this will get rid of TypeScript and other stuff like that. You can no longer import, but what I could do is come over here and say is inline. This is helpful if you're working with like a third-party library or something like that, but notice now it's saying I can't import because this is no longer a module. All right, lastly, as promised, let's talk about UI frameworks. This really is just the beginning of working with Astro. Now, if you're used to working with React or something like that, I would really caution you from going straight to what you know, but the cool thing is you can if you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here, kill this server. We'll use that npx command again, Astro add, and we could do Vue, we could do React, we could do whatever we want, and it will actually add everything we need to use a UI framework. It installs everything, it updates my config, it even updates my tsconfig.json, and I'm set and ready to go. Now, what I can do is just import any kind of component I normally might use. We could say something like card.tsx. Let's go ahead and create this, and I'll just scaffold out a card, and notice that I've got this React now in here. Now, inside here, maybe I might have some other things as well, so let's have a paragraph that says card, and then below here, maybe I have a button. This button will say click me, and let's add an onClick for a handle click function. Now, just as you might expect when working with React, you can simply come in here, and you can just import that. I'll import card, and it will pull it in for me automatically, and I can just close that off. Now, I've got it saying card, and I've got this click me. Now, if I click it, you'd expect for it to console log. But if I open it up down here, you'll notice that's no longer the case. Let's get rid of this so it won't error out anymore. It's not actually doing anything. And that's one of the cool things about using Astro. You can use Vue or Svelte or React or any front-end UI framework to render out your HTML. But by default, it's not hydrated with the JavaScript that's needed. In fact, I can show that to you if we open up the console here, and let's go over to the network. And let's just go ahead and refresh. You'll notice I've got 50 requests, but if I scan through this, you actually will not see all of React loaded. What you have to do is tell Astro, hey, I want to use client-side JavaScript here. Because you might have a bunch of components that just statically render HTML using JSX or something like that from React, or a Vue component or a Svelte component. What this means is you can actually import things directly into your project with Astro and get up and running right away. Now, this is where that caution comes in. Be careful not to just divert to the way you used to write stuff because you'll lose a lot of the powers of Astro. However, when you need it, it can be super helpful. Now, I want to come over here. We're just going to set a min height here. We'll do 100 view height, and that way we get the card below all of this down here. In fact, let's make it 120 to make sure it's out of frame. So how do we get Astro to hydrate this card? What I'm going to do is come over here, and I'm just going to use what's called a client directive. I'll say client, and you'll notice I've got a bunch of different options. Idle, load, media, only, and visible. Generally speaking, idle means just after everything else is done on the page load. Load means right away. Media is based on a media query. Visible means only once it gets visible in the viewport. We'll talk about only in just a second. I typically use visible unless I have a need for something else. So notice if I refresh here, you'll notice I have 52 requests still. But as soon as I get close enough to this card, it loads in the additional requests I need. So it hydrates it just in time. And now if I click over here and we return to the console, it now says clicked. Now the other one I mentioned was client only that we haven't talked about. Astro will usually render the HTML and then just wait to hydrate it with JavaScript when needed. However, sometimes you might want React or Svelte or Vue or whatever you're using to actually render the HTML as well. In this case, you can pass client only and then pass the name of the framework you're using, in this case, React. Now, we've only covered the basics in this crash course. There's so much more to Astro, like server-side rendering and middleware, dynamic routes, API routes, content collections, server islands, and so much more. If you're interested in learning all about Astro and kind of a slow, dedicated approach, I'd encourage you to check out my course down below, learnastro.dev. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.